Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show, well, it's primarily about astrology and art and spiritual adventure, but oftentimes I branch out into other topics just because I think it's wise for us to have a good full toolbox of tools that we can draw on as we try to navigate these troubling times. My guest will be on in a few minutes. Before we get started, I want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon about 1:30. In there you'll find a couple of paragraphs of mundane astrology for the week to come as it applies to all of us, and then I break it out into the individual signs from there. Also, included in the newsletter are links to my podcast, my television series, and a number of other things that I do. So I encourage you to look at that. And you can sign up there through chrisflisher.com or turningofthewheel.com. I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Twitter, and all those places as well. So we're going to be talking today about interesting subjects, saying yes to life. And my guest is Elliot Richardson. He's got a master's degree in psychology. He's an author, love and joy coach, and a workshop leader. And he brings to us a new a point of idea on how we, trying to release the false narratives around our lives and trying to direct our gaze towards a power, light, and unconditional gratitude with your heart. In short, he's trying to get us to say yes to life. And so that is an interesting comment. So Elliot, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, so this is the full title is Say Yes to Life, 7 Keys to Living Full Out from Within. Now, in that, there you obviously have a process that you go through. How does one know when to start this process?
I'm not so sure if I have a process. I just have a lot of recommendations for or pathways going from the mind to the heart.
Right. Well, I was saying, when someone, when would someone turn to this book as a guide? In other words, where are they in their lives in order to bring them to this spot where they want to try this?
Yes, I think it would be something that would be appropriate for those who might be struggling with happiness, who might have some maybe mild depression, or that they'd like to, anyone who wants to raise their happiness up a notch, even those who aren't struggling with depression, and if they just want to go closer to ecstasy or go closer to the space of waking up with joy and gratitude every day.
Right. So that applies to almost everybody, I can imagine. I don't think anybody on the planet right now is exactly overjoyed. And I suppose that we all have varying levels of happiness and varying levels of discomfort and doubt and all those things that sort of swirl around us, because there's so much that we don't know. And because there's doubt, we tend to fall into the negative approach, I think many people do, as opposed to looking at life through a positive lens. And I'm trying to figure out how to make that switch from the sort of the fear and gloom to the joy and happiness step.
Well, I can tell you about what happened to me this morning, and that'll give you a concrete story that you can put your hat on, like a hat peg. I was at a cafe, and somebody was about to leave, and the lady behind her said, no, I'm going to pay for your coffee. And the lady had obviously, ordered a coffee, and then looked for her debit card and looked for cash and was penniless. And so she was on her way out the door, but the lady behind her did pay for her coffee and just insisted on it, and with a loving tone. And she even said, you know what, I've been there too, so please accept this. I was just so taken by her kindness and by her warmth and generosity, and it lifted me up into a higher state of consciousness. It gave me some happiness. And the science has proven that not only those who do acts of kindness and those who receive acts of kindness, but also those who witness acts of kindness do benefit in a biochemical way from witnessing it. It does raise your happiness level.
Just simply because you're sort of touched by the sort of the genuine humanity and outpouring of generosity from one person to another. It's just sort of a gentle act, just like rescuing a stray dog or something like that. It gives you a sense of hope and optimism.
That's right. And, I ended out creating an exercise that we're all welcome to try. I'm going to be the first one to be the guinea pig, and you can join me if you like. I'm going to start with a kindness list. I'm going to write down at least one thing every day that I either have received as a kindness from somebody or given as a kindness to somebody. And I've noticed when I was watching that the lady who was giving the cup of coffee was giving herself an amazing gift. Mm-hmm. What happened in that moment was she was reinforcing her nobility and her magnificence. She was lifting herself up into the vibe that comes from being kind.
Mm-hmm. And the kindness is a sort of self-fortifying kind of effect, because once you are kind back outward, you certainly tend to get the mirroring effect back of kindness coming towards you, correct?
That's true. And it also really does help you in saying yes to positive self-image of yourself.
Right. It does give you have to get a certain spot where you can do that, though, I think. Now, how do people in a time that we're living in right now, which we all know is very fractious, and we can explain why it's so difficult right now. There's very obvious reasons from the view of astrology, from many different views, about why this time is so difficult. But when people are so filled with stimuli and they're so overburdened by sort of the pace of life and the rush of life, how do they sort of step down into this spot where they sort of shut all that distraction out? Because the distractions pull us in certain directions which we may not want to go. There's a lot of distractions that pull us in ways that are negative and violent and sort of involve retribution and payback and sort of vengeance. There's a lot of that coursing through our collective consciousness these days. And I'm wondering how you would, how do people break out of that sort of mind cycle?
I appreciate that question, and I know of so many people who are indeed watching the news all the time and getting caught up in the negativity of the world. And I really do feel like it's a gradual process, at least for me, the going from a state of misery where I was for so many years. I was so full of bitterness. It wasn't that I was watching the news all the time, and it wasn't all about the world. It was really about my own feelings of life being unfair and how I was getting the short end of the stick. Mm-hmm. So I went from a very miserable place to a place of joy and gratitude. I really don't have any more bitterness anymore or any jealousy. Mm-hmm. And it was a very gradual journey. It started with owning my complaining, owning the bitterness, owning my experience, owning my power to pivot. So when I was just going into taking responsibility for where I am and for where I found myself in life and my experiences, I was also just shedding the habit of complaining and blaming and all of that. And shaming. So that's really the foundation, the first step to making a gradual shift from one extreme to another.
Right. I would say that's probably the hardest step, though, because it takes an awful lot for a person to look in the mirror and say, okay, it's time to face the music here, dude. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of difficult to have that conversation with yourself unless you are... I think it takes a certain kind of person to be able to look in the mirror and be very honest with themselves and forthright and say, listen, you're not is perfect. You're not as good as you may think you are. Life is not a bowl of chocolates, as they say. And getting to that point of just accepting the fact that that you're mortal and you're looking in the mirror and saying to yourself, it's time to get real. That is, I think, without a doubt, the hardest part, because that requires a complete disavowal of the ego and who you are, and your preconceived notions of who you are. Your self-image is wrapped up in that. How do you cross that barrier? You can't just do that, turn a switch and be there.
Yeah, it is gradual, and from what I like to focus on is spiritual growth. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of different exercises that can be helpful to. You really did hit the issue right on the nose. It's a bullseye, because the self-image is the hardest of all beliefs and opinions. The opinions and beliefs about yourself are the hardest ones to let go of, according to Richard Rohr and St. Francis. And I just think that starting by saying yes to your uniqueness and celebrating your uniqueness and celebrating your unique gifts can be one of the things that helps you go in the right direction. Celebrating is a big thing. So I'm not going to say, let's start with celebrating your unique gifts. I'm going to say, let's backpedal and go with appreciating. Appreciation can be a wonderful place to begin the journey towards gratitude and celebration. And I encourage everyone to write an appreciation list every day for the next 30 days. It can be something like, I appreciate myself for my loyalty to my friends.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate myself for my love of cats. I'm a cat person, so that'll be on my list. Other people might say love of dogs or whatever.
Right.
I appreciate myself for my willingness to learn. It can just go in all directions. I appreciate myself for doing this, for being this way, for this trait, for this gift that I have, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. That's all well and good, and it sounds very easy to do, but I think it's far harder than that because people in our daily lives are caught up in the swirl of, raising children, paying mortgages, paying student loans. All these are external stressors that bear down on us. I think it's not easy to do in a world where you are connected with many other people, and many of us are connected with wives and children and dogs and cats and all the other complexities that go with life and the complications that easily pull us into sort of a respond mode. So, we're going through our life and we wake up in the morning, we say, oh, we're going to have a great day today. The sun is not out, but I'm happy with it being gray. And, we just sort of accept things as they are. And then all of a sudden you get downstairs and somebody, is spilled a thing of milk in the middle of the kitchen floor and they got to get on the school bus and you're running around. And before you know it, there is no time for this sense of self-reflection. And I think your approach is very logical, and I've followed many of these steps myself in my own self-recovery because I had the ability to do that. But how does one do all that if one is in the state that I just mentioned, where we have all these external, things pulling on us that require our attention right now and then?
The first thing to do always throughout the day, especially if there's a lot of stress or a lot of feelings, anger or sadness that you're experiencing, is to just feel whatever you're feeling, whatever arises within you, fall out 100%. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying nurse the anger or the resentment, but I am saying let it express or at least flow through you and be experienced, mm-hmm. Fall out, and then allow it to be gone, to let the next thing that shows up arise, and just allow the dance of feelings to take place throughout the day in their own choreography.
We are as humans, I would say we are very much of a habitual sort of species in as much as we often fall into, patterns that are comfortable to us. Oftentimes people will live within a pattern, even if it's a negative and unhappy pattern, because it's familiar. And the familiarity says, well, we know what's going to happen if we go to work today and my boss is a jerk. We know what's going to happen if so-and-so next door neighbor, lets their dog in my backyard. We know what's going to happen. So we have to... when you're in that mode, how do you, turn that? How do you turn that? That's because we are victims of habit. We sort of, if you wake up in the morning and you've got a load of stressors on your mind, you can't just look in the mirror and say, oh, life is rosy. You've got to find some way to tangibly work with either eliminating them or making them of less of a priority, sort of, pushing them down further in your list of things to be worried about. I mean, there's so many things that we can be worried about on a daily basis, and yet sometimes we get very worried about insignificant events because they seem to be predominant in our lives. And it's that line that's difficult to cross. I think if you're a single person living in the city by yourself and you've got an array of, or even if you're just with somebody, and you've got an array of things that you're thinking about, it's difficult to step out of that sort of swirl because of the familiarity. I mean, I have clients who've come to me who are reluctant to leave their unhappy relationships, either with their boss or their career or whatever, because they know it's familiar. And they don't know what's around the other end. They don't know what's around the bend. Maybe if they took the step and left that person or left that job and found something new, they might find themselves in a much happier space and say to themselves, wow, why did I do this a long time ago? But it's that familiarity, that habitual familiarity, that is such a hard task to break. It's almost like, how do you stop biting your nails or quit smoking? You know what I'm saying?
I appreciate that, and I think you really are. I'm so glad that you are encouraging us to really look at what we're dealing with. At the same time, I really do believe that happiness, the research shows that happiness can exist without it being conditional to the circumstances, without it being tied to what's going on in your life. That you can indeed raise your level of happiness a notch and then another notch for no reason.
Right.
I really do think that I imagine that the mystics may have been some of the ones in the past who have experienced happy for no reason as opposed to happiness for good reason. I'm all in favor of happy for good reason. If you get a promotion, definitely celebrate that. But also, I'm very much interested in cultivating inner harmony. I'm very much interested in cultivating self-trust, which is a key to inner harmony, alignment, poise. These are the back doors to the house of happiness. And if you're pursuing the house of happiness through the front door, it's not going to open up because happiness is elusive.
It has to be the inner work that requires that.
Yes, gradual spiritual growth.
Right. Now, how do you build self-trust? I mean, that can only come through experience where you do a sort of trial and error. You say, well, I don't really trust myself with this person. I may be falling in love and I don't really know if I should. And then you find out that you're not the right one and you've fallen in love and you say, why didn't I trust my judgment? And how do you develop self-trust? I mean, that's got to be sort of a trial and error kind of experiment where you try something and it works and you get confidence, you keep going again and you try, it works and you try it again. You know, it has to have that sort of continual reinforcement that supports the idea that, yes, I can, in fact, trust myself.
Well, I'm going to sound a little bit like a 1950s school teacher for a moment. People are not talking these days about character, and that's a loss. We need to be talking about character. When you are being kind, like the lady in the coffee shop was being kind, she was able to put a little money in her self-trust bank account.
Right.
When someone is cursing somebody out or something, that might end out being a withdrawal from the self-trust bank account. We're always doing one or the other. So being on our toes when it comes to integrity and kindness, that kind of stuff, the little stuff, does make a difference in the level of self-trust you have. There are other things too.
Yeah. It's also about awareness. I think you've got to be incredibly self-aware. I know that, and I think some of that can only come through experience. You know, we develop our personalities and our character develops over time through experience. Experience is built through character is built through experience, rather. And I think that people, in my experience, who have been through a certain sense of trial and been faced with many challenges within life often seems to be able to rise to this situation better because they've seen something. They sort of have developed empathy. And empathy is a key thing that's missing in our society today. We can see it from the very top all the way down, where there is no empathy at the top of the pile in our country, and it works its way down through people. And as a result of not having empathy, people tend to not understand what somebody else is going through. And if they don't understand what somebody else is going through, they tend to lash out. So there's this dichotomy between lack of empathy and trying to help people at the same time. And in many ways, it's the answer is found in the opposite. So if someone is not empathetic, then the answer is to try to be overly empathetic with them. You know, there's sort of there's that dualistic quality of life where the unhappiness holds the key to happiness, and the happiness holds, it's sort of a residual, mutual, respective kind of relationship where you can't have one without the other. And when people can recognize that, then they can easily turn to the antidote, which would be the opposite in some ways. And that's part of it, I think, because it's not an easy step to get to that spot of happiness. You just don't swipe a magic wand and get there.
Yeah, people who are looking for a magic wand will not be happy with my book.
It really is about having that one-to-one honest conversation with yourself in the mirror, saying, I want to change my life, and I'm going to change my life by taking a new approach. That's what it really seems like to me.
Yes, the first relationship that we need to tend to is the relationship with who we are, with ourselves. And part of that can be something very simple, like saying yes to your uniqueness, saying yes to your unique gifts, just falling in love with yourself and celebrating who you are, being open to walking into the dark room and instead of shining a flashlight on all of the things that are wrong with your world, all of the things that are burdensome that you generally complain about, that are stressors in your life. Instead, turning on the overhead light and noticing that there is a lot of glory within your nature. Healing the relationship with your heart instead of being caught in the monkey mind that is always noticing and judging the bad things.
Mm-hmm.
Going down into your heart and noticing what's true for your heart. Your heart is the place where you are, the heart is always willing to celebrate, and it's the place where the glory in you resides.
Right. The that monkey mind overcoming is not an easy task. You can fully admit that. That's a very difficult voice to turn off in many people, and that's probably the hardest thing. And I've had experience with this myself. I mean, we all have those monkey minds. There's times when our guard is let down. Say when you're in sleep, waking up in the morning, and you've got your certain things you got to get done during the day, but you have a few moments to think. Where does your mind go in that time, and how do you retrain it to go differently? I mean, there are forces underlying our psyche which bubble up with these ideas and images and thoughts and worries. You can't just shove them into a suitcase in your mind and put them back in a back compartment. You kind of have to. Well, I mean, you can do that, and there's even that exercise itself of trying to change the narrative is probably worthwhile, but it has to be founded in something that has substantial longevity to it, so you can continue to work on getting rid of the monkey in your mind.
I so appreciate that point. And my approach to happiness is first and foremost to insist that those who are doing exercises where they are approaching the resistance, the voice of resistance within them, maybe there's a voice within you that's like, oh, I don't want to wake up today. I have to get up out of bed. I don't want to go to work. Maybe there's a voice within you that's saying, I don't really want to do spiritual growth. I don't want to do any of these exercises.
Mm-hmm.
That voice you can approach and encounter, and you can do so with complete acceptance, without an agenda for that voice of resistance to be changed. If you cannot do that without sincerely saying, I am here for you and I do not demand that you change at all, without honestly saying that, then you need to wait until you're ready to do that. Mm-hmm. We need to establish unconditional love with every voice and every part within us, including the parts that are sabotaging us, including the parts, the archetype of the prostitute who's willing to sell your soul for money. Everything has to be unconditionally loved and embraced.
Despite your station in life, in other words, you've got to be. And many people are struggling these days, and so it's difficult to cross that divide and get to that spot. I mean, this does requires. I mean, this is the challenge of all this work. I believe it's kind of like when you're an alcoholic, you go to alcoholic. Being able to admit you are an alcoholic is the biggest challenge, and once you've admitted that, then you're ready to roll. But that's what I've heard at least. I've not experienced with that, but that's what I've heard. It's sort of that acknowledgement of, yes, I'm flawed. Yes, I'm broken. Yes, I've got these things I got to take care of. That may be a difficult step, but I think that's probably the most vital step. Do you think that's true as far as the admission that there's a problem here? There's an elephant in the room here.
You may very well have that right.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like that might be the most difficult step to take, and it really is. Sometimes people aren't able to take that step until they hit rock bottom.
Right. Yeah. There needs to be an event of some sort where you wake up and from this haze, whether you either get fired from your job or your girlfriend leaves you or your your partner leaves you. There's always that rude awakening that may drive you to this. But do you think people will just wake up someday and say, gee, I just want to get happy and I can't get there, and they go running off in ways of trying to solve those problems? They bury themselves in merchandise and materialism. They bury themselves in vacations and beauty treatments and all this stuff to try to mask what is actually going on inside. And it's not until you pull the mask off that you really see what's going on. And that's an honest discussion.
Yes, a lot of people fall into the trap of looking for the outside world to provide happiness, and it really is an inside-out process, an inside job.
It is an inside job. Yes. It's an inside job. There's no question about it. But you've got to reach a certain plateau or threshold where one is willing to be open to to do that. I mean, there's something that has to happen at that point in time where you have, and you, like you say, you hit rock bottom, whether you're despondent, you're homeless, wherever that may be, or you're even just unhappy in your relationship. I know people who've been married 30, 40 years, and they've come to the conclusion they want to get divorced, and that's a very rude awakening for people, especially if you're not prepared for it.
Well, there are a lot of different ways to pivot the direction you're facing. That's really what it's all about.
Right.
Is am I facing the face of God or the divinity within my heart or the beauty of life? Am I facing in that blissful direction or am I facing somewhere else? And if you're not facing that blissful direction, you're facing hell. And I've certainly done a lot of both in my life. So I just really like to support people in making a pivot from one direction to another. And of course, it's not going to be, oh, I pivoted once, and so now it's all done, and I waved the magic wand, and so now I'm happy forever and ever. It is something that we need to attend to every day.
Right. I do think that's true. It's sort of like a maintenance thing. It's like a routine you've got to go through. I mean, many people find that through meditation, they find that they can get closer to their soul that way. They can get closer to their true root cause or the core. But in my personal experience, I think I've always been open to the idea of wanting to do this in my life, and I think it was only until the events happened in my life that lined up that certainly raised my attention to a level where there was no other way to solve the problem other than to embrace something like this. You reach a certain, well, I guess you could say hit rock bottom. And hitting rock bottom requires you to bounce back up, and then there's that whole duality, because there's this sort of negative, positive swinging of the pendulum. The pendulum has to go all the way one direction before it can start to go back the other direction, and then you begin to see the recovery. But oftentimes, I have found that requires a clear head, requires a clear sort of inventory of where you are in life at that time, and how do you take stock of that inventory, and what do you do with that inventory. We all have an inventory of sorts. We have our personality traits, our assets, and our liabilities, and identifying them and finding which way to go is a difficult task to do alone sometimes. I wonder if it isn't more helpful to work with someone such as yourself in that regard.
I suppose it might be.
It's the acceptance of the self and working with others that gets you to the spot where you are able to embrace that. It's that real, visceral, honest discussion with yourself. That's what it comes down to. It's like, okay, I'm having a discussion with myself, and I'm going to really turn this corner. Right?
Right. But the thing is that, another thing that helps is developing trust in the cosmos.
Right.
Being able to answer Einstein's question, is the universe a friendly place, with a yes. This can make a huge difference in whether you're experiencing life from a place of fear or from a place of trust. And it can also help you to let go of fighting what the cards that have been given you, fighting the circumstances, fighting yourself, and stepping into non-resistance.
Yep, non-resistance is important. Yeah, I get that. But we're talking about each of us has to arrive at this space with comfort and with acknowledgement of who we are. I guess that's why I use the word inventory. We have to take an inventory of sort of what our assets and liabilities are. And when we reach that, we are able to perhaps step into this and figure out the best way to resolve it. Because I think if it's annoying enough problem, if it annoys a person enough to have this repetitive sort of negative cycle in our lives, we will then respond by naturally, just through the nature of ourselves, respond to trying to find a better way out. That seems that way to me, at least. And in that regard, it's very interesting that we can get there. We're talking today with Elliot Richardson. He's a psychologist and a happiness coach, and we're talking about his book, Say Yes to Life, 7 Keys to Living Full Out from Within. We're going to take a quick break here, and when we get back, we're going to go through the 7 keys and get a little discussion of each of them to see if we can understand them more fully. And in the meantime, Elliot, do you have a website or some way people can get a hold of you in that regard?
Sure. Go to www.sayyestolifebook.com.
Okay, good. Sayyestolifebook.com. Okay, we'll take a quick break here, and we'll be back in about 2.5 minutes. Encourage you to look into those outside sources, and we'll get back and we'll talk about the 7 keys when we get back. Okay, hang in there, folks. What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know?
course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color.
Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My guest today is Elliot Richardson. He is a psychologist and a happiness coach, and we're talking about his new book called Say Yes to Life, 7 Keys to Living Full Out from Within. And much of the discussion from the first half of the show was really about that idea of going into your inner core and finding out what is broken inside and how to bring that inside outside in a way that makes your life more full, complete, and ultimately happier, which is what our goal is. Now, I would admit that life is not a bed of roses, and it's not a box of chocolates, but there are keys and there are gems in there that we can strive to find. I think that's part of what the Elliot's approach is here. So let's start with some of the 7 keys. The first key you have in your book is say yes to expansiveness. Now that seems interesting to me because I think the more broad your approach is, the wider your purview is on the world, the greater your sense of you have more to draw on, more data to draw on as to how to live. If you know about Tibetan Buddhism, if you know about something from another part of the world, your view of life might be broadened. Is that the basic idea of the expansiveness?
If I could rewrite my book, I would definitely add all that you have just spoken about. I love that. My focus is really on noticing if you're being contracted or constricted, and I certainly was being contracted and constricted when I was in my youth, and when I was bitter, when I was looking at all of the people who could sit at the outdoor cafes that I couldn't afford, and I was just swimming every moment. Wherever I went, I was swimming in a soup of jealousy. Why did they have more money than I do? Why did they have more friends than I have? And so on and so forth.
A sort of victimhood. You go through that sort of being a victim.
I was just so trapped in being a victim, and I don't think I was so aware back then about how jealous and bitter I was. That's something that has become crystal clear in hindsight now that I'm at the other end of the bridge. So those were examples in my own life of moments when I was contracted and constricted. And the opposite of that would be being expansive, being free from all of the blaming being free from all of the shaming, being free from all of the complaining, and being free from all of the contractedness. It really is sort of the same as saying stepping free from contractedness. That's how I think of saying yes to expansion. It really is saying yes to who you are by default, by nature, because I think that in our heart of hearts, we are expansive creatures. We come into the world with all of this power and glory and beauty and nobility, and what gets in the way sometimes is the complaining and the blaming. So when you just let those go, what's left behind is the expansive self.
Right. Much of that comes from conditioning and from how we're raised and the influences that touch upon our lives from our parents and our peers as we grow up. A lot of that comes from them, and it's a question of whether or not we can handle that, withstand that. When you were going, and this is really sort of what you're describing does sound to me a bit like victimhood. You're sort of jealous. Why has everybody else got it better than me? Blah blah blah. I understand that very well. It's a very common sort of approach. Why does somebody who get lots of money and I can't get any? I mean, that's a very common play. And it's one of the things that drives us. But you must have hit. What was it? Was there a specific moment in your life, or a point, or a sort of a epiphany moment where something became crystal clear that you had to change? Was there something that happened to you that sort of changed your course?
I don't really have a specific moment that I remember as far as hitting rock bottom. I do know that I just had that awareness at some point that if I wanted to be able to fulfill my dreams, and my dreams have always been to help people in ways that uplift the soul, I just knew that if I wanted to get off of this trajectory, I just had to have ownership. I just had to totally let go of the blaming, my father blaming God, blaming life, and I had to be the one who had ownership and responsibility for where I was. There was a moment when, shortly after I sort of began to let go of the bitterness and all of that, all of the blaming and stuff began to fade. There was a moment when I was walking down the street and I saw some handsome guy and his boyfriend right outside of a 5-star hotel, and immediately it was like, why does he have such a good job? Why is he dressed to the nines and I can't afford those clothes? And why is he so lucky to have this nice boyfriend with him? And I caught myself immediately. It just within a second or two, I just noticed what I was doing. And so that was one of the first times when I really caught myself and immediately was able to just move on and go to a better place within me.
But you see how you mentioned when you're talking about your father, how he influenced you. You're at a very young age, you're impressionable, you're gathering data, you're building your character, you're building your personality, and all of a sudden someone comes along and injects a dose of negativity. You've got to be able to recognize that and go on with it. Some people fall victim to it and they just perpetuate the same negativity. And it's hard to escape that if you're caught up in a swirl where that's the parameters of how that life is lived.
Yes.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. So you are bound by that sense of the context, I guess is the word I'm looking for. We're all victims of our own context because this is the life we live. The next one that you have down listed is say yes to your uniqueness.
Yes, that is another way of saying celebrate who you are. Fall in love with who you are, and it really is celebrating especially your heart and the gifts that you have to bring to the world.
Right. And, obviously that's sort of what makes everybody unique in their own sense. But some people say, well, I know people who say, oh, I'm not creative, I can't do anything. And yet they go out and they make a beautiful dinner or something like that, or they decorate a room a nice way and they say, I have no skills, I can't create a piece of art, I can't write pieces of music, I can't dance. They get caught up in that negative swirl, and they're not, without realizing that everybody has talent. So maybe you're a great person with children. Maybe you're great with dogs and cats. Maybe you're a wonderful teacher. Maybe you have, and I've found in my own experience that oftentimes we don't come to that state of a uniqueness until we actually venture out into the world and offer of ourselves what we have without judgment on ourselves. So you would go out into the world and you'd say, here I am. This is what I do. Or even going to the place where you start giving. Giving and charity is one of the strongest ways to make your life better. There's no question about it. I had one of my sons went away to a camp was involved in something called AmeriCorps, which is a wonderful program sponsored by the government, U.S. government, at least it was. I'm not sure if it is anymore, where people enter into public service and you get paid a small stipend. But in that service, he was helping children in daycare centers. He was building playgrounds in inner cities. He was helping other people with certain diseases. And through that simple act of giving, certainly it built up his ego to the point where it built up his self-esteem to the point where he was able to feel good about himself. And that has sort of carried through his personality. So that's a learned skill, but he certainly made that pivot by the simple act of giving.
I love that story. And I want to go back to the story that we started with, the lady who was generous and bought somebody else a cup of coffee. I think they're both sort of the same thing. What we're talking about is giving ourselves the gift of an experience of ourselves in our nobility. Whenever we have the opportunity to be kind to somebody, to be loving, to be non-judgmental and unconditional in how we perceive the world. If we jump on that opportunity, we are reinforcing that part of ourselves. And if we do that again and again and again, consistently, these are little things I'm talking about, but I also am talking about being consistent with them, writing the appreciation list 30 days in a row consistently, and each time maybe thinking of something new that isn't on the list yet.
That's good, yeah, because I think people might repeat themselves. They don't want to do that. You want to have nothing new each time, if you can.
Right. So basically, if you're going on a walk through the park and you see some litter or whatever that you are inclined to pick up, that'll be another chance for you to go ahead and feed the feeling good about yourself.
Yeah, it's a very small step that we could all take. Each of us could take a piece of litter and put it in the trash can and help out in some small way. Hold the door for somebody. Do simple acts of kindness really do mount up to giving you a better sense of self and a sense of self-esteem and a sense of value and worth. And they're sort of ways of saying, yes, I love you to yourself, which is a really part of it. The third key you have now is saying yes to the new, which is sort of what I alluded to earlier by saying, get out in the world, experience something new as much as you possibly can, because the wider your array of experiences the wider that array of experiences is, whether that be traveling, whether that be studying something new and different, whether it means merging yourself with different cultures and societies, even trying some foods you've never tried from a different country you've never tried before. All of those unique little touches of expansion will add to the sense of new. And that's what I think in that newness, you get a sense of, there's a natural curiosity, there's a natural sense of anticipation and possibly excitement, especially when you travel or you're going through education. You go to school and take a class, even if you're an adult and you've got kids screaming all night, you've got lunches to make and homework to do. If you could sneak out one day a week and take a class at a local community education center, you'd be learning something new. You'd be expanding. And in that expansion, you might find the way forward.
I like that very much. And I just want to add one thing to it. In addition to everything you were saying, saying yes to the new can be about saying yes to possibilities, including possibilities that you've never even considered before. If you're really imaginative about what might be possible, new possibilities can land on your radar.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. I think the more you push the envelope, and I mean that in sort of a metaphorical way, where you're pushing the envelope of trying something new foods, new pets, new friends, new neighborhoods, new whatever the newness is. If you keep that churn of newness following all the time going through, I think ultimately you'll get to where you want to be, because it's only through experimentation that you find anything. The next one, the fourth key, saying yes to knowing what you want, is a difficult one, I think, because we may know what we want, but we're not quite sure how to get it. And oftentimes we have so many choices before us. How do we make the choice of what we want? I guess you know that, from your intuition? Or how would you come to that point?
Say yes to knowing what you want is really about knowing what you want. And
how do you know that?
And that's really about having a clear heart, being in touch with your heart's true desires. I believe that what we all find, there is a universal place within every heart that has the universal desire to love and to be loved and to serve and to give. Um, so that's really what I'm alluding to first and foremost, is getting in touch with that part of you that is so excited and enthusiastic about the opportunity to love, about the opportunity to be loved, and being grateful for the opportunities that might come to you today to be loving and generous and kind.
Yeah. Knowing what you want is tough. I mean, I think we probably all know that intuitively. I think it's probably deeply hidden sometimes. Some people it may be very clear. I know I want to be a ballet dancer. I know I want to be a writer, whatever. People can have those clear aspirations in front of them. But I think this is more than just occupation. It has to do with how do we feel about what do we want, what is worth our pursuit. In other words, what's worth pursuing that makes our lives the way we want them to be. And I think that that's a conversation people have to have internally with themselves and saying, being really honest, what do you really, really want? Do you want to be this or do you want that? What is it that you really want? And then set forth the path to sort of get there. And much of that, I think, probably comes from eliminating preconceived notions, which brings us to the fifth key, which is saying yes to freedom from the past. So we have preconceived notions we drag along with us, just like a sack of toys behind us, things that we've had, all this baggage, literally baggage from the past, when our fathers got mad at us or our mothers got mad at us or something happened in the schoolyard. These things tend to haunt us. And the best way to get rid of them is to bring them up to the surface, acknowledge them, and then sort of embrace them, I think, right? Isn't that sort of the way to go?
I like that very much. I just want to add to it that one of the main focuses in this chapter is letting go of all of the beliefs and opinions that you might have about yourself, letting go of the self-images, and also letting go of all of the ideal images along with it. In other words, all of the shoulds.
The stereotypes, yeah, right.
Well, especially the shoulds you might have about yourself. I should be more like so-and-so, or I should be more intelligent, or whatever the images that you are striving to reach.
Right.
Whenever there's a should, that's going to get in the way of being accepting and happy.
Well, there's always doubt there. That's why it's like shoulda, coulda, woulda. There's always if I only did. It's always about if. If only I had done this. I wish I had done that. I could have done this. I would have done this. I should have done this. Those questions are all self-defeating in some ways because the premise is on self-defeat. It's on negativity. It's on self-deprecation. It's not being good to yourself. You're not encouraging yourself. It's looking back with regret. So it's important to look forward, or at least to have this say, yes, I am human. I am flawed. I made mistakes in my life. I apologize for that to myself and to others for making people unhappy or hurting them or hurting myself. You have that sort of break and you apologize, wipe the slate clean and sort of move on from there, I think. And that's saying goodbye to the past because we can't ever go back. We know that. We can't ever go back. So all you can do is accept what's happened and make peace with it and then move on forward because you can't go backwards. All you've got is tomorrow. Even the last second that just passed is gone. You're not going to reclaim that in any way. So since you can't go back, why regret? Why bemoan? Why look back in anger? It's better to look back and say, well, it was not nice. It was not a good thing I did, but it made me who I am today, and I've learned from my lessons. So that's probably the best approach to it, I would think, right?
That sounds good. And once again, we're talking about our relationship with ourselves and healing that relationship and fortifying that relationship. And one of the ways in which we can, that can help us to do what you're talking about, that can help us to let go of the regrets and move forward to the next chapter in our lives, is practicing the process of Ho'oponopono. That process is just, maybe lying down or sitting down and closing your eyes and saying to yourself, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you. So if it's something that you did and you want to heal something from the past, so if you want to heal your relationship with yourself, you're both saying that to yourself and you're receiving it. So you're saying to yourself, I'm sorry, please forgive me. Thank you, I love you. You can keep repeating that for 10 or 20 minutes, and if tears flow, then let them flow.
Yeah, forgiveness is very difficult. I mean, forgiveness is tough. I mean, many people can forgive others before they can forgive themselves, which is ironic. Just because, we have to learn to forgive ourselves because the past is the past. It really is. I mean, if nothing else, from a mechanical standpoint, it simply is the mere process of the passage of time. And when time passes us, we can't go back, as I said earlier. So therefore, we've got to just accept where we are and move on. And move on with forgiveness and kindness to self, I think is important. The next key, the sixth key, is saying yes to grief. And I think this is a really important one. I've got firsthand experience with this, and I know that it is a long process to get there because grief is a very unpredictable animal. It can come on you when you least expect it. You could be having a great time at a concert or watching a comedian or something like this, and all of a sudden it brings back a memory of something and triggers that grief, and boom, next thing you know, you're crying. And it's very unpredictable, and it has many different stages. Sometimes you're angry, sometimes you're bewitched by it. It's just got very strange. It's a very strange animal. But again, it comes back to the idea of the past. If something has happened, and it is in the past, grief is a reflection of something that has gone. And so that is therefore in the past tense. And again, we come back to the idea of how do we get to this spot of saying yes to grief.
Yes, and so grief may be in the past, as you were saying, and it's also in the present. If you're experiencing the grief in this moment,
right,
then you need to be with the experience.
Yep.
You need to be present to the grief. I just am going to speak in shorthand right now and give a very quick overview of what saying yes to grief is.
Okay.
We already discussed the importance of feeling every feeling as it arises within you full out with totality. I can give a metaphor. If there's a beach ball sitting on the surface of a swimming pool, it has a lot of different colors, it has a lot of different feelings, it's all one unit. So all feelings, in other words, are really one unit, and we don't really need to bother to even name each feeling. It's just what you're feeling. In fact, we may even have feelings sometimes that have not yet been named by humanity, that might not be in the dictionary as far as I'm concerned. Feelings are something that we could be exploring over the next 10 years and learning more about. In any event, if it's sitting there on the surface of the pool, that's great. But if you're pushing down to submerge the beach ball, then all of your all of your feelings are being submerged all at once. Not just the anger of the moment, not just the sadness, but also the joy and the happiness. You're numbing yourself to being available to all of your feelings. It's just not part of your experience. It's not available to you. So that's just a metaphor for the importance of feeling every feeling full out and crying every tear that shows up. Don't just cry for a minute. If there are more tears that need to be cried, cry for another minute and another minute.
Right. I don't think you should ever stop that. I think you should just let the tap flow for sure. And it really is important to do that. There's nothing wrong with grief. I think it's a very natural process. I think it's a very natural way to sort of. I mean, it's inevitable in everyone's life. All things must pass. Whether you lose your dog when you're a child, which can be very painful for a child, or whether you lose a friend or a relative or a mother or father. All those are, as you mentioned before, character-defining moments in our lives. And we have to, because we are all unique, we have to accept them as, in many ways, these events that happen are gifts. There was years ago, I went to, I'm not sure if you know who John Kabat-Zinn is, but he's a psychologist who brought Eastern religion basically to the West. And his whole idea is sort of accepting what we've embraced and living life. So even the negative things that happen to us are part of our toolbox of experience. And because we have experienced pain, we are then hopefully become empathetic. The secret to pain and unfortunate events in life is to be able to pivot from them into something that's positive and see them as precipitating moments to get the ball rolling, so to speak. And I think that's an important commentary on how it is to adapt and move forward, because we've got to move forward. You can't stay stagnant. The seventh key we have in your book says, say yes to happiness and joy. And that sounds kind of obvious. People would say, well, why wouldn't I want joy and happiness? Everybody wants joy and happiness is what it's all about. That's our pursuit. And it has to be acknowledged that we can have that in our lives and accept it in our lives. But in order to have that, we've also got to have the opposite in some ways, right? I mean, that's one is dependent upon the other.
That's something I'm not an expert at about whether the opposite is necessary or not. And I welcome you to say more about that in a moment. What I was getting at when I wrote this chapter was really just pointing people to the undercurrent of joy that we all come into the world with in our hearts and that stays with us until our dying day. This undercurrent of joy isn't necessarily tapped into or noticed because we do have so many distractions in the world and all of the things that you were talking about earlier in terms of being caught up in a swirl of negativity and so on and so forth. So I was basically, what I want to point out as far as say yes to happiness and joy goes is that we can tap into our hearts and be aware of the undercurrent of joy at the same time that we are in a state of chaos, at the same time that we are simultaneously with being caught up in the swirl of negativity that you were talking about. Because we are very expansive and vast creatures. Our souls are so much larger than our bodies.
Right.
So there's room for us to experience whatever the conditions are, whatever we're going through, even if it's grief. And also at the same time, get in touch with the joy that's in our hearts.
Yeah, and I think that's probably something hard for people to do sometimes because they said they don't always have the time. It seems like I guess I'm speaking to the what I would perceive to be sort of the average American citizen out there trying, or whoever citizen, universal citizen, trying to get through this tangled times we're living in. And acknowledging it. So that's what brings me to the point of when do people find the time to do this if they are pulled in many different directions? I think your 7 keys are important. And I guess the thing comes down to how does the rubber hit the road? How do the people literally do this? They've got to be fully conscious and they have to be willing to embrace this and take this great leap of faith in some ways, right?
Yeah. And the thing is that it doesn't really require any time. I don't have a lot of exercises in my book, although I have been introducing the appreciation exercise over the last hour and other things.
Right.
But it's not really all about the exercises. It really is about where are you coming from. In other words, what direction are you facing? If you were to be on a springboard, and it was the bitterness springboard, and you were to jump from that, you would land in a place of bitterness. If you're coming from your heart and its tenderness, that'll take you somewhere else. If you're coming from a place of trusting that the universe is good, you'll land somewhere else. All of this is very powerful.
Oh, I believe it's very powerful. I think the secret is getting to yes, and I think that's getting to where you have that. It's the same thing I mentioned earlier about the alcoholic acknowledging that there's a problem. When you acknowledge there's a problem, then you're already almost all the way there. It's just then it's a question of addressing the problem with practical advice. But the problem is I think people have to say, I bet you could ask anybody out in the world there today, random person, are you happy? They would probably come back and say, I'm generally happy, yes, maybe. Or they'd say, no, there's things I'm not happy about. So we all have these vacancies in our tool bag, so to speak, our life experience. We have these vacancies we want to be filled. And I imagine everyone would probably feel that way, but I think that it takes a certain kind of person to be at this point in life, because I think you've got to hit, sort of like you said earlier, a rock bottom before you can get to the spot where you're so desperate to pivot forward that you just would go ahead and do it.
Maybe so. In any event, it is true that if you do approach life with that outward looking and without the inward looking. In other words, if you are waking up and thinking, okay, what pearl can I add to my necklace, to this string? What event is going to be happy out there that I can, at the end of the day, say, oh, I have another pearl on my string of pearls on this necklace. If you're constantly looking for another thing out there, another pearl to add, another one, that is definitely a trap. It's not. That's just not going to lead to happiness. It's much better to be open to accepting all of the cards that are dealt, and to look for the happiness to come from within.
Right. Acceptance is a very difficult concept, I think, for many people, because you really have no choice. I mean, and if you keep resisting against it, it's a downward spiral. You just can't shake yourself out of that. That's why I think now. So you must do sessions and help people with this sort of approach, and you do talks?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Whenever I work with clients, I have private coaching that I do, and it's really just sort of like a one-on-one workshop that could be offered in the course of one day, but we just meet an hour at a time each week. What I do is we never talk about happiness. We would never have this kind of a conversation in our coaching sessions. We are always totally focused on inner harmony and spiritual growth. If you have inner harmony, if you cultivate inner harmony and fertilize that garden, and also the garden of alignment, if you fertilize those two gardens, what ends up happening is the inner harmony tree grows, and as a side effect, or as a byproduct, or as a fruit, happiness shows up on its own. It will not show up if you're chasing it. It will show up if you have consistently been fertilizing and cultivating the inner harmony.
Right. They are very much elected. And, the idea of tapping into that is really where it's at. And I think that, but sometimes people need a little bit of help. And I think that's where your work might come in handy, sort of giving them that helping hand to get over a rough spot, And sometimes it is wise to get an outside opinion. That's why people go to therapists. It's like, well, what am I doing wrong? And they want to be able to say what it is in their life and how they can redirect that.
Well, actually, I don't give opinions. The workshop that I have created is all about assisting people, supporting people, and having their own ahas.
Right.
I really think it has to be totally an inside-out project.
It's got to be an inside job.
It really is helpful for me to say things to people.
Yeah, it's got to be an inside job. But I think the value of guidance and just at least bringing up the subjects is helpful for people. Yeah. Well, that's been great. Elliot, my guest today has been Elliot Richardson. His book is Say Yes to Life, 7 Keys to Living Full Out from Within. And I think the critical piece is that it's a question of looking in order to find the answer, which may lie without. And I think that the internal examination is the most critical one, and probably the hardest for many people to do, because no one really wants to say, gee, I'm not that great. We kind of want to bury our heads in the sand and go the other direction, which perhaps is natural, but nonetheless, it's a valuable lesson nonetheless to be able to get inside and work with what's inside and bring it out. So it makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you, Elliot, very much for coming in. Once again, your website for your book again is what?
Thank you so much for having me on. The website to go to is www.sayestolifebook.com. There's a free gift there, so even if you're not interested in the book, please do go and get your free gift. Okay, sounds very good. We'll certainly make sure that gets posted to people and they understand it. So thanks so much for coming on today, and it's been great listening to your approach to life. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.